Weirding Way Media.
Welcome to episode 70, that's 70, amazing, of the Filmumentaries podcast. This is Jamie Benning talking to you here from my home in London, back from our little trip to LA last week. It's March 2023, this is the first episode of the month, a little later than intended due to the trip I just mentioned, and more on that in a moment. If this is the first time you've listened to the podcast, welcome. You have about an hour or so of film history chat ahead of you. Please do check out some or all of the previous 69 episodes. You've missed some good ones. And, you know, I do the same when I find a new podcast. I kind of cherry pick the names and the films I recognise. But I do encourage you to check out any episode and you'll definitely learn something and hopefully be entertained along the way. If you're a regular listener, thanks as always for your continued support. If any of you like my work, and this is work, albeit work that I love, then please visit patreon.com/Jamie Benning. There are several tiers to choose from with different perks and merch too. Talking of merch, you can now support the podcast by buying some Filmumentaries goodies, including Filmumentaries mugs, t-shirts, bags, bottles, and even socks. Plus t-shirts with Inside Jaws and Inside Jabber posters on them, the ones that my buddy Pete Starling did for me years back. Why not buy one for your next film convention? In fact, Star Wars Celebration is coming up, so you might be the only person there wearing one of these t-shirts, and therefore, by default, you're the coolest person in the room, by my reckoning anyway. All of that can be found on filmumentaries.creator-spring.com. Bit of a complicated link, so I'll post that and the Patreon link in the show notes. So just a brief update on the documentary project about Joe Alves. We had a trip, myself and co-director Patrick Tyndall, out to LA last week. We were there again nearly a year to the day to continue working on the documentary, doing interviews. We managed to fit in 8 of them, with Joe himself, then Kevin Pike, who began his career on Jaws, thanks to Joe, and went on to have a big career. I guess building the DeLorean of Back to the Future was the biggest accolade. We also visited Carl Gottlieb at his home, who of course wrote Jaws, wrote the screenplay, that is, and also appeared in the film as Meadows. We then drove many hours across to Arizona to interview special effects legend Roy Arbogast, who worked on a bunch of pictures with Joe. Well worth the 18-hour drive. Him and his wife Lynn were just fantastic. Wish we could have spent more time with them. Lovely people. Then we drove back to LA to visit Taylor Hackford at his home, husband of actor Helen Mirren. She was in the house too. We didn't get to see her, unfortunately, but Taylor was fantastic. He also worked with Joe and had some lovely things to say. We also met and interviewed the author of Designing Jaws, Dennis Prince, a lovely guy who shares his enthusiasm for, well, the same things we do, including Joe. We consider Dennis a friend of ours now. We had fun hanging out with him and having dinner at Joe's house too. Then we went round the corner in LA to chat to Deputy Hendricks from Jaws, Jeffrey Kramer. Back to Joe's to interview his lovely wife Jerry, who's been fantastic during this project, helping us out a lot. And then we finished up just before we flew out of LA with Greg Nicotero, the showrunner on The Walking Dead. We got to visit him at KNB Studios and just geeked out for a couple of hours. My goodness, he's got some things there to look at. You'll see on my Instagram a few pictures from there if you go to @Filmumentaries. So the documentary does continue. Your interest and support is very much appreciated. You can follow progress on my Instagram account, which is @Filmumentaries, as I said, and also on the official Not Your Average Joe account, which is @JoeAlvesDoc. Just in case we decided to change the title of the documentary. We're actively looking for investors at the moment for the project, so please don't hesitate to get in touch if you're interested or if you know somebody that might be. And I'll be releasing a bonus episode about the trip in the coming weeks. Thanks for the feedback on the Ken Ralston episode, last episode, number 69. Another hero of mine. to tick off the list. It's so great to talk with him, and you can find that episode along with all the others on Apple, Google, Amazon, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Please remember to share with like-minded film nerds. This is a small independent podcast with no marketing budget to speak of and no big name presenter attached to it. It's just me. So your help is very much appreciated. Okay, for episode number 70, I finally spoke with director Patrick Reid Johnson. He released his many years in the making labour of love, titled 5/25/77, a film that semi-fictionalises and chronicles the early life of a character named Patrick Reid Johnson. Yeah, it's about Patrick himself and his love of movies like 2001, A Space Odyssey, Star Wars and Close Encounters. Now, I saw an early cut of this film about 10 years ago with several scenes missing, and Patrick and I connected over the release of My Star Wars Begins. I'd put in that some of the black and white early John Jimpson cut of Star Wars, and he was like, "Where did you get this? This is what I saw back in 1976 or 1977 when I visited ILM." Watch Patrick's film, have a listen to the interview, or whatever way around you want to do it. Just make sure you do both. It's a great watch, and it's great to finally see it out there. So here's my chat with director of 5/25/77, Patrick Reid Johnson, and I'll be back at the end for a bit more jabbering on. Patrick, let's talk about your film, 18 years in the making. Where did it begin for you, the film? But where did your love for these movies begin that you talk about in your film?
Oh, it began on the opening night of the release of Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey in 1968. I was 6 years old, and my father had wanted very much to be there to see it opening night, and I didn't know anything about it. I was very interested in space in general. I mean, Fireball XL5 apparently was, when I was 2, was the thing that made me just sit in front of the television with my mouth hanging open. And then from then on, into Thunderbirds and Captain Scarlet and all that kind of stuff. And I remember that we went to the theater to see the film, and there were 2 theaters right next to each other. And when we got there, the show that we had thought we were going to get into was sold out, which was kind of bizarre, but we've never seen a thing sold out before. And we ended up going to the theater next door to watch, I think it was Bon Ryan's Express or something. And my mom was like, "Well, what?" So we're not seeing 2001, we're seeing Bon Ryan's Express. He goes, No. We're watching this thing to mark the time until we can get in to see the next showing of 2001. So, by the time we got in, it was like the 10 p.m. show for 2001: Space Odyssey, and I'm 6 years old. I mean, I've got school the next day. I'm like, but I didn't fall asleep until the very end. And even then, I mean, I was, as they were carrying me out, I was sort of, I was 6 years old on my mom's shoulder, and I whispered in her ear, I said, "I'm going to direct movies." And she went, "Why don't you graduate kindergarten? And we'll see how it goes." So, and I was done. My DNA had been rewritten, and not because I didn't really understand what directing was at 6 years old. I thought directing meant you got to build a bunch of great spaceship models and shoot them and have people hanging from wires in spacesuits and all that sort of thing. And to some degree, Stanley did that himself. Not really. I mean, he did a lot and thought a lot, but Doug Trumbull, of course, had as much or more to do with those shots as anything. And I remember just being utterly fascinated by the technology involved and by the designs and by the, for what seemed to me to be the very first depiction of space that seemed anything like real space. No needle-nosed rockets with fins, although as we used to laugh at those, and now apparently they work.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it, looking at the year it came out? It predated the moon landings, which kind of blows people's minds. I mean, there's I was born in 76, so there's a whole generations of people that look at that movie and just kind of accept it for being this wonderful masterpiece by Kubrick, but didn't realize quite how visionary it was, and how that's how we first really saw what space could be like. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
But thank
Yeah,
goodness your parents took you to that screening, hey, because we wouldn't be here right now.
that's true. What's funny too is that I mean they very much not only tolerated but encouraged and even made up for the fact that I was so fascinated by space, especially after 2001, but also because I was just deeply interested in NASA and the the Apollo program, which was happening from the time I was born to,
Yeah.
well, it was really, Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo, but I was too young to even remember. I don't think I ever consciously remember seeing a Gemini mission or Mercury for sure, but Apollo, I saw all of it, and
Mm.
I was allowed to stay home from school any day there was a launch, because the launch was usually supposed to happen at like 6 a.m. So you might see it, and then mom would take me to school,
Mm, mm.
or I could even make the bus, but sometimes they wouldn't go up until evening, and so I was allowed to stay home and locked in front of the TV. And here's your TV dinner,
Yeah.
Let me know if it goes up, and because they, I had something that fascinated me. And how often does that happen with kids, and I was determined at first to become an astronaut. I think it was 2001: A Space Odyssey that made me go, well, now hang on. I could kind of have the cool experiences of sort of being an astronaut on a soundstage, and I wouldn't have to join the Army or the Air Force, so.
So how soon after that screening, when you're 6 years old, did you kind of start to figure out the mechanics of what it takes to make a film?
Well, this within months of that, I determined that this little Super 8 Brownie movie camera, little
Mm.
box thing that my dad had on the high shelf in the closet, was going to become an instrument of power for me. And I began borrowing it without anyone knowing. The way they finally found out I was borrowing it was because the supply he also had of film, the Super 8 cartridges, was dwindling to the point where he went to get one day and he looked in the box and there was none left. And I guess I should have thought of that. And meanwhile, I was giving the cartridges to my mom to take to the local pharmacy that would then send them to Kodak, and they'd come back like a week later, develop it. I was just saying, oh yeah, Dad wanted you to, get these developed, and she wasn't looking at them. And then I was borrowing the projector in the middle of the night and going down to the basement and watching whatever I had done. And what I had done would routinely be set fires at my little model tanks and airplanes and train set and that sort of thing. But again, they started noticing I was running out of toys. Yeah. Where did that beautiful airplane you built go? It's in heaven now, Mom.
It's great that your parents kind of tolerated it to a certain extent. They encouraged you. We all do that with our kids, don't we? As soon as they hook onto something, you want to give them the chance to kind of
Sure.
go as far down that
Yeah.
road as they can.
Yeah, and it was, and I think, weirdly enough and ironically enough, it was my father who sort of dove in with me fairly quickly to say, well, if you want to do an atomic bomb, because everybody was worried about the atomic bomb at that point, just grab your aquarium, put the fish in another bowl for the day, empty it out, clean out the water, turn your camera upside down, put a photo of Chicago behind it upside down, and get some white shoe polish and drop it in the top and it'll turn into this beautiful mushroom cloud, and you'll shoot it upside down at high speed, and it'll look like an atomic bomb. And I was like, how do you know this? Apparently he had messed around with some of the same stuff when he was a kid. And so it was, for him, it was like it was something he could be a little bit heroic about. Like, he was the one who took the molds off my face and my friend Bill's faces for the first 8 masks that we made, with literally plaster of Paris and straws up our noses, and it didn't work very well. It took a while to get off of our faces. And there was a moment there where I think my father was very worried that he might have had to have taken my friend to the emergency room to have it sawed off his face,
Wow.
But the problem is that it was to him just a hobby for me. And as soon as I became of a certain age where it was time to start preparing for medical school and wasn't preparing for medical school, the schism began, and did not repair itself for many years, but it did finally. Especially when by the mid '80s, I was making more money as a model maker in Hollywood than he was making as the chief of anesthesia local LA hospital.
Mm, mm,
Um, when you break it down, I mean, it wasn't. I mean, and weirdly enough, in fact, that's probably true of a lot of things. I mean, when you finally do become a director, everybody thinks you're probably the highest paid person on the crew. Well, maybe when you become a famous director, you might be close, but when you're not a famous director, you're just starting out. When you average out the amount of time the director spends working on a film from the time they're conceiving it, developing it, pre-producing it, shooting it, post-producing it, releasing it, I'm one of the lowest paid people on the crew.
yeah,
But
that
he
that hourly
impressed
rate
by the fact,
dwindles. Yeah.
oh yeah, but he was very impressed by, by the time he had reached, by the time I'd started directing my first feature, we'd repaired things pretty well, just because he realized that I'd gotten to do what he had never gotten to do, which was my dream.
Mm, mm,
Uh, he had wanted to be an impressionist artist and go hang out in the salons of France in the
mm-hmm,
30s, 40s, or and he could have done it. He was very talented, but his
mm.
parents said they'd disown him. And in the 1930s and 40s, that was a big deal. Now it'd be like, I mean, nobody would. Well, maybe nobody, maybe some people, but most people would just say, "You'll disown me, okay?"
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
but in those days, that was like, a death sentence for your future.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he became a brilliant physician. He became brilliant at something he hated.
Mm.
And I thought, there's no way that's going to happen to me. I don't care what he says or what he threatens me with. I'm going to be what I want to be.
Yeah. And so, and that was the journey you took. But let's talk about the film then. So the film is 5/25/77, and it's kind of a semi-fictionalized version of your life growing up, loving these movies.
Yeah.
Um, and you, as named in the film, are played by John Francis Daly, who people will know from
Right.
Freaks and Geeks. I saw a cut of this film probably about 10 years ago, didn't I? Do you remember we connected? I think I put out my Star Wars Begins
Yep.
filmumentary, and you'd seen the black and white footage, and you said, "Where the hell did you see this?"
What?
Yeah,
I need that.
yeah, because that's what you saw, wasn't it? But let's just go back to when was the film kind of, when was the inception of the film? When did you realize I could do something with this? I could tell this story.
Well, it's funny because not terribly long before leaving Los Angeles, I'd gotten out there finally for real in 1980 and set up shop doing miniature work, and I'd sold my first script to 20th Century Fox in 1981 or two, and I so I had this sort of dueling career of visual effects and screenwriting, but nothing was getting made. I was just writing and selling scripts, which is nice,
Mm-hmm.
but it would be like, sell a script, think it's going to get made, it doesn't, go back to the model shop.
Yep.
Write a script, think it's going to get made. It was this cyclical
Mm-hmm.
thing. And at a certain point, though, when I finally got Space Invaders made, because Fred Roos had seen the film, and he took me out to lunch, and he said, "This movie, dollar for dollar, has more production value in it than any film I've ever seen in Hollywood in its history. You're going to tell me how you did this." And I told him. He said, "I want you to have breakfast with a friend of mine tomorrow." And I said, "Okay." And so I get a call from my agent. He goes, "I don't know what happened at your Fred Roos meeting, but you've got an important breakfast tomorrow." And I said, "Really? Who?" And he goes, "George Lucas." And I was like, "What?" And so I had breakfast with George Lucas. And meanwhile, I mean, the movie, because Steven Spielberg had seen it and had gotten Jeffrey Katzenberg to buy it for Disney and put it in. We didn't even have distribution when we made it. And after one screening with Steven, we went from not having distribution to Disney's putting it in 1,500 theaters in the spring of 1990. And it was like, okay. and so all this stuff was happening. And as part of that, there was a friend of mine, Ed Elbert, who knew Gary Kurtz. And I obviously had met George and had a breakfast with him, and it was really fun. And we kind of became like geeky, a little bit of like geeky pals. So he took me to breakfast to talk about possibly directing Radioland Murders.
Right.
And we talked and talked and talked. And one of the things before this meeting, I said to myself as I was driving to it, I said, "Patrick, there's one thing you must do to make this meeting a success. There's only one thing you have to do." And the other part of me is like, "What's that?" And I had said, "Do not mention the word star and the word wars anywhere within two sentences of each other in this meeting, and I never did. I never mentioned this story. I never mentioned what had happened, and I never mentioned Star Wars at all. And George called my agent later and said he really, really enjoyed the meeting, especially because he already knew that I had a connection to Star Wars, and I didn't say a thing about it, because he'd done his work,
Yeah.
And I think Gary Kurtz, by then I'd met Gary, and Gary had told him something about it. But what happened was, so Gary Kurtz was trying to get the rights to a book by Mike Resnick called Santiago. Great sci-fi book, just fantastic. And I was trying to get the rights. And then Mike Resnick was sort of sitting in the background going, oh, okay, well, the producer of Star Wars or this dork. But I'd done a really good pitch. So I called Ed and I said, what, do you think I have a chance to, maybe, I don't want to go up against Gary because I'm not going to win. And he goes, well, I don't know. And I said, well, maybe we could meet. And he goes, that's what I think you should do. He said, why don't you guys sit down and talk it over and maybe you can do it together. And I said, okay. So he arranged a meeting and it was love at first sight. We had such a good time. We just totally clicked. And in fact, by the time the meeting was over, we decided he was going to move into my new offices at Universal and start like co-developing projects with me. So we did that, and we developed a whole slew of things. And every now and then we go out to lunch and just kind of do pitch talk, just throw ideas around at each other. And one day I said, look, I really want to do this thing called Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. And it would be My American Graffiti. It would just be all of the stories that are in 52577 plus a dozen more from that time and that place and that little town, but nothing to do with the Hollywood and Star Wars part of it, right? Mm-hmm. Everything else, just a coming of age, slice of life, kid in the Midwest who just wants to leave home thing, right? And leave the Hollywood stuff as a dream on the side over there, right? And he goes, and Gary listened, and I said, it's all music based. I've got to get all this amazing music like you guys did for American Graffiti. He goes, I get why you want to do this. He goes, and I think you should. He goes, but I don't, I've done my American Graffiti, and I don't relate to your decade the way I related to mine. And so, have fun. And I said, well, there's one other little thing I left out. And he goes, well, what's that? And then I told him the Patrick Goes to Hollywood story and everything that happens within it, which is much more extensive in here and in memory and in truth than what's in the movie. Much more. I actually ended up working on the mothership all day long. That's when I was in the model shop, because these guys were so tired of, heat gunning fiber optics into the 10 trillion windows on the mothership. They're like, oh, you want to be a Hollywood model maker? Here's a heat gun and 15,000 pieces of fiber optics. Go do it, kid.
We should, it's difficult because I don't want you to kind of give away, because it's a great moment in the film and I don't want to kind of give away that big moment, but you basically went to geek heaven right there.
Right. That over the course of just a couple of days, the stars aligned in a way that, you couldn't, if you wrote it, people wouldn't believe it. Right. In fact, the funny thing about the movie is it is semi-fictionalized. Yes. However, the weirder and wilder and more insane and unbelievable the moment, the closer to the truth it is. It's only the things where I had to kind of collapse a couple of years worth of events into one and, amalgamate some characters and there were situations that didn't really connect historically exactly the way they did. So you had to build bridging material that made that make sense. And it's the bridging stuff that's made up. But like from the time I arrived in La La Land to the time I leave, every single thing that happens in there is exactly what happened with just omissions. That's all. And the reason I did it that way because one, the truth was as interesting as anything I could have made up, but also, deniability. So if Steven Spielberg got vacuumed up by real aliens and there was no one left but lawyers, I could say, no, but this really happened and I have witnesses.
Let's just say then, in terms of, let's not go into too much detail, but let's just say, Spielberg, you touched Spielberg and Lucas's worlds in that most formative time, the time that formed like the reason why we're here right now. I'm a geek, you've made a movie about that.
Yeah.
It's just incredible to think that the stars aligned to that extent. But it's so funny how so many people I've interviewed on the podcast, like I interviewed Ken Ralston recently, and he was saying that there was no kind of film school back when he started. I mean, he's older than you, but then he would like write to Harryhausen and he'd get a reply, and he end up
Right.
meeting him and all this kind of stuff. And you had the same situation, didn't you, with Herb
That's
Lightman
right.
of American Cinematographer?
Well, that's right, because it was such a it was such a I mean, it's still a small industry. It's
Mm,
still a small town, really, when you think about it. But in those days, it was literally a cottage industry. It was a very tiny industry. It didn't make that much money before the
mm,
big blockbusters of Jaws and stuff. I mean, it made some money, but it was more about fame than it was about giant fortunes being made. It was a
mm,
glamorous industry. But it was also so tiny that very few people even thought to themselves, oh, I could get into that, because it seemed so exclusive, which it was. It was
mm,
exclusive because there wasn't that much work. It was how many films got made a year, especially by the 70s. By the time you're talking about the 70s, production had waned significantly from where it had been in the 40s and 50s, and even into the 60s. And so now, weirdly enough, while there are infinitely more opportunities to put stuff out into the world, and there are suddenly openings for people to do work all over the world. The issue, of course, is that there are also now, because there's a belief amongst young people trying to get in, that it's not as hard to get into because there are so many more opportunities. So there are these massive film schools now, some are good, or some are just degree factories. Some are trade schools, and there's nothing wrong with a trade school. I mean, it is a trade.
mm.
It's just, it's gotten so big, the industry, that in a weird way, that it's, even though it's easier in some ways to get in, it's not easier to be distinctive.
Mm-hmm.
You don't, because when you got in before, everybody was betting on your project. Now they're just sort of running them through, and whatever works. It used to be that because, especially because it was all done on film, and it was all done, there was this sort of force field around every project, that it had to be very, very carefully vetted and controlled and designed and built by hopefully experts.
Mm-hmm.
Now anybody with the Macintosh and a high-end DSLR can make a feature film, and if they have any talent and they're willing to listen to other people, they can make a really good one.
Mm.
And that's the good and the bad, because there are a lot of people who have all the equipment and all the money and all the technology, and for uncles that'll keep paying for it, or aunts or whatever, but they don't know what they're doing.
All the
You know?
gear and no idea is what we say here. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, that's
right.
right, though, isn't it? There is that sort of dilution of it now, I guess. I've spoken to several VFX supervisors recently who kind of finished their career just
Right.
before the kind of Marvel movies hit, and they just said, I don't know how you manage a movie like that, how you supervise the VFX on a film like that now, where you've got potentially hundreds, even thousands of individuals working on the effects. How do you make it cohesive? How do you quality
Yeah.
control it? It's just, I can't
Yeah.
even begin to imagine how that's possible.
Yeah. I mean, I at one point in my career, in the 90s, I sort of thought, I mean, the project that I'm traveling for right now, and meeting with many, many fun people about, over the next week or two, is called Star Sailor, and it's a big deal. It's something that I wrote originally in 1985,
Mm.
and when I wrote it, when Steven got Disney to pick up Space Invaders, and then I was offered this huge deal, both at Disney and one at Universal. The Universal people won out by promising that they would make Star Sailor. Now, Star Sailor, you have to understand, was a 435-page long screenplay.
Wow.
And then Tom Pollock said, "Don't go to Disney, come to Universal. We'll make Star Sailor. Disney will have you working on theme park rides." And so I ride films, which probably wouldn't have been a bad idea, just to get my feet wet. But anyway, So, but I believed in this project, but it was also on paper probably the most expensive sci-fi film ever conceived. And it was already something so big that it was going to have to be chopped into at least 3 parts, if not, and that it was so ambitious that it was impossible, to be honest. And Universal was sort of saying what I wanted to hear to get me to sign. And but now most of what's in it is some of the, I don't want to say, I don't want any of my effects friends like John Knoll or Richard Jersich or Mark Stenson to hear me say, it's some of the easiest stuff you can do now. But it is some of the easiest stuff you can do now because it mostly takes place in space, and it mostly takes place using techniques that didn't exist at the time. And I'm, as you know well, all about using the right tool for the job, and especially the primary analog, reptile brain fooling imagery before CG, not because I don't believe in CG and not because I'm anti-CG at all. I come from the John Knoll school, which just happens to also be the Patrick Reid Johnson school because we were best buddies growing up and best men at each other's weddings and, grew up together as model makers. And that philosophy is right tool for the job. If it's a forced perspective hanging foreground miniature accentuated with, CG, laser bolts or whatever, awesome. If Creature from Jim Henson's Creature Shop with, digital eye blinks and saliva, then yay. Now they're all just versions of the paintbrush,
Yeah. What I liked about your use of miniatures in I'll call it 77, was that, when I saw that cut 10 years ago, there were definitely scenes missing. There were links between scenes that weren't there, where people would travel from one scene to another. And I've seen over the years, of course, on social media, you showing us these great models that have been built, or you've built, I'm assuming, with your team, and, of cars, and then using, kind of primitive means to get the best shot that you can. Because, the budget on a film like this isn't going to be huge. You need to find the most economical way to do it, and I think they come out great. They've got such a charm to them. Because like you say, they fool the reptile brain kind of side of it, but also, as a person who's looking at it critically and with the eye that I have, I'm looking at it going, I love that because I can feel it. I can feel it's tangible, and I can feel the work that's kind of gone into it. And it reminded me of all the movies that I've grown up loving and the ones I'm still talking about to this day.
Well, and to me, and I used to teach my film students, I'd say, look, watch a movie called Pearl Harbor and watch the battle sequences like this, because that's what you're going to do. Because even though they are spectacularly designed and shot with, cameras that follow bombs all the way down through a smokestack into the engine room or whatever. I mean, they're all mostly impossible shots, which, by the way, I also teach them, don't shoot an impossible shot.
Yeah.
The minute you shoot a shot that can't be shot, you've blown, your reptile brain doesn't accept it.
Totally agree.
And they say, now watch 1950, I think it's 57 or maybe even 54, Sink the Bismarck, right? Miniatures and what the Bray Studios tank, I think it was, the miniatures are probably, the length of, your dining room, right? And the water doesn't look the right scale, but when the hood blows up, it hits you right in the chest. Because you have been invested in the story. You don't want the hood to blow up. Of course, it's a miniature, but you also pretty much know that Kermit the Frog is not a real frog.
Yeah.
And yet we care about him.
Yeah.
E.T. does not fool anybody, right? What Stephen did with E.T. was he made sure that the kids emoted so well with that puppet and related so well to it that they imbued it with reality, right? Yep. And because they did, we imprint on them, and we go along with it, and it broke the world's heart. I mean, the entire world cried their eyes out, right? Yeah. With the miniatures in this film and all the effects in this film, because I've seen all the, I've seen everything from the whimsy and love that the people that appreciate it are showing to, people going, some of the miniatures are so awful. And I'm like, purpose, because it's all meant to have been made in the 1970s. The whole movie meant to have been made in the 70s. And on top of that, and by the way, there's probably 600 or 700 visual effects that none of these critics even notice, where someone's eye line's been shifted, or is it, a performance, split screen,
Hmm.
because this it was better on this guy, and uh, we had three levels of effects: invisible, um, which included the several John Knoll shots that John did personally on his
Right.
own computer for us. Which I'm not even going to give those away. See if you can find them. But and then we had what I call the close encounters level effects, which are meant to be maybe not the equal of, but something on the order of Douglas Trumbull, Richard Yurisich, Matt Yurisich,
Hmm.
Rocco Job, Matt Painter, who by the way did about 20 matte paintings for us on this movie. And I met him on Close Encounters, which is crazy.
Wow.
And and those effects are meant to say, huh, looks like something you'd see in a 1970s,
Yeah.
epic sci-fi film, locked off matte paintings, right? No 3D matte paintings, no, none of that stuff,
Hmm.
right? Yeah, if you can tell they're effects, that's fine, but they're meant to comfort you, right? They're not meant to make you go, wait, what? And then there are the willfully cheesy effects that are literally designed to make you go, that's preposterous and stupid looking. You can see the wires, like when the little lunar
Yeah.
landers come in, and you can literally see the strings. It's not that we couldn't hide them. It's that we went to extra trouble to make sure they were lit so you'd see them.
Yeah, and the way I view it, all of this, we're experiencing it through you as the main character, and we're experiencing it through his imagination. And
Right.
there's all that question about, is this, you kind of go, is this supposed to be like a real moment, or is he imagining this, or and that's
That's
great.
and
Yeah,
that's the whole point. I mean,
yeah,
when he's driving to his girlfriend's house after fighting with his mom, and we cut to the miniature car on the little
yeah,
treadmill,
yeah,
with the road going by like Flintstones, with the moon behind it. I'm not trying to fool you. I'm
yeah,
trying to say, instead of cutting to a wide shot of the Pinto, which I still own, I could have gotten a shot of that driving across the countryside. Instead, I'm cutting to a regression of this kid's maturity, where he's falling back into the comfort of the artificial construct of what he's capable of the illusion he's capable of creating for himself, such as the illusion that I'm just going to drive to my girlfriend's and move in with her.
yeah.
Right? There's a whole reason for the choices. It's not that we were desperate and we're like, oh my God, we need a shot of a Pinto driving. What do we do? I mean, we have 3D models of the Pinto. We have the real Pinto. We've got stock footage. We got hours and hours of the thing actually driving places. So that those choices, obviously my Pinto didn't really turn into a spaceship, but it was much more expensive and difficult to make it turn into a bad spaceship than it was. We could have done it all in CG in a
Mm.
weekend, spent a lot less money. We had to build bad models, and not bad, but what I could have built in my garage.
A certain crudity to, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah, no, that's great. And the other thing I love as well is, knowing the movies that you're sort of talking about and paying homage to, just being able to kind of m- match the style of those movies. So you've got the 2001 moments with the big wide angle lens,
right.
and the Spielbergian kind of lens flare and all of that stuff. I mean, if this is one of the reasons I want to talk to you, because I've been kind of talking about this movie for a while online, and I just want people like me to
Me
see
too.
it, because we're just going to go, what I did, which was, oh wow, that's cool,
We
that's
know what
great.
that's from. I know
Yeah,
what that's from.
yeah, yeah,
It's one of my favorite things to do. And look, I'll make no secret of it. I put in Easter eggs everywhere for people like you, and for people like Doug Trumbull and Richard Yurisich, and effects people, for John Knoll, for Steven. I mean,
hmm
when Space Invaders got picked up, when I ran into Steven for the first time, and it would have been, I don't know, 20 years since I'd first met him, and then I ran into him because I was called to the
hmm
campus up there at Amblin, and it wasn't even for a meeting with him. It was meant to be with Kathy Kennedy, who was going to be kind of supervising my deal with them, and Steven was coming across the little quad in the middle of the campus there, and he walked right by me, and I was heading the other way to the offices, and I thought, my mom would slap me upside the head if I didn't turn around and say hi, right? So he's walking away, I'm walking this way, and I just stop and I go, Stephen? And he freezes in his tracks. And now I think, what a stupid thing to do. I mean, he's a guy who's got to be worried about security. Here's this weird guy, this stranger he doesn't know he knows, and who just called him out all alone in the middle of the courtyard at Amblin, right? And I'm thinking, I hope he's not armed. He'll blow me out of my socks just for saying hi. And so he slowly turns and he goes, yes. But not mad, not evil. He was just sort of like, I'm going to play this cool. I don't know who this guy is. Why is he addressing me? And I'm like, Pat Johnson, Patrick Reid, the Martian space surveyor. And he said, oh, and he goes running over and goes, oh my, he reduces down to like a 15-year-old geek instantly. And he just starts saying, I loved your movie, man. Oh my God. He goes, don't think I didn't see all the homages. I saw that little truck under the stars driving along.
Right.
I saw it. And I said, well, good that I put him in there for you. So,
Amazing.
And the next thing he said was, he goes, that little girl, what's her name? Ariana Richards? And he goes, oh my God. He goes, I don't know what, but I'm putting her in something. I'm working with her. Where did you find her? Blah, blah, blah. And he kept quizzing me about her. A year later, he cast her in Jurassic Park. So, it was pretty fun.
Amazing.
But yeah, I always try to include things, it's like anything else stylistically, the movie's really, 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 there are some people who love it and some people who just detest how I cut the movie because it's super frenetic, but so is the character.
Mm-hmm.
And remember, the whole thing is literally the memory, the construction in his head of everything that's happened to him. Right. And this kid is so unfocused and so ADD that I wanted it to feel that way, even if it irritated you a little bit, right? Some people it irritated a lot, and other people it irritated just enough that they're like, calm down, which is like exactly what his friends and some of them were trying to say to him until he gets to Hollywood, at which point it slows way the hell down. Mm-hmm. It's very formal in terms of how the camera is used, and it goes from 185 to 240, widescreen. It goes from spherical to anamorphic. We actually made much more use of the surrounds in Hollywood and then use much less of them when we're back in Little Lake County. Mm-hmm. And then when it comes back, it gets back to being frenetic again because he can't let go of that overactivity and overcompensating until things start to slow down at the behest of others. Mm-hmm. And it becomes quieter in terms of its cutting. And that was all purposeful. It's not that I want to cut 1,000,000 miles a second all the time. It's that I wanted that feeling of this kid's never going to get anywhere if he doesn't sit still for a moment and concentrate, focus. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, no, I think that works. And I there's so many little moments in there that I really loved. We're as a teenager, we were all looking for that girl reading the sci-fi novel to kind of go, she's one of my people. I remember being 18 and just meeting this girl once when I first started to work, and it turned out, she was stunning. She looked like Winona Ryder, like it was totally up my street. And then the next thing I hear is she loves Star Wars. I just thought I'd found the perfect woman, But there's just so many little moments in that where, it's what we connect to in movies, isn't it, ultimately? I don't want to diss Stephen because I'm hoping to get Stephen for Spielberg. This is for an interview for my documentary. But I didn't enjoy The Fabelmans as much as I enjoyed your film because I didn't connect with it in the same way. Because, I guess a different era. I also couldn't really identify with how his character was portrayed and his family was portrayed. I love the moments where it was about him shooting the films and showing the films, but the stuff in between I didn't kind of buy into. Whereas with your film, I liked both of those sides of things because, I was born in the mid-70s, as I said. I thought you replicated the 70s fantastically. So I that's somewhere I belong because, when it got to...
Because where I grew up hadn't changed very much.
Well, and I was going to say this, when I grew up in the 80s, it would still look like the 70s because not everybody had the latest car, the latest clothes, and all of that stuff. And that's one of the things that, people often forget when you're making a period movie that it's not just about the things that came out that year. And I think you did that
Right.
really well because it feels broadly, late 60s, mid to late 60s and 70s, and I think it does that perfectly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think
Dawn Ferry, the production designer, did the fact that she and I actually went to high school together helped a
right.
lot.
Yeah.
In fact, I mean, it got to the point where there were sometimes the younger art department people would, be decorating something somewhere in my room or the basement or the stage or whatever. And she'd go, "Oh, no, 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 Patty would never have put that there. That would have been over here." And they'd be like, "How would we know this?" And she goes, and then, and I was like, "It's okay. It doesn't have to be exactly what I would have done."
Yeah.
But she wasn't having it. You know, it was very special too, because every location other than the high school, which was conveniently burned to the ground by some unhappy students like 2 years after I graduated, every other location in the film is exactly where the event took place.
Wow.
Every location, including the living room, if you know what I mean, in Linda's house.
Wow.
So we were literally sitting on the floor where it all happened.
Amazing. So this film, as I said at the start of us chatting, that it was 18 years in the making. When was the first shot put on film, and when was the last shot?
We rolled camera in mid to late. It was, I guess I want to say it was late July, early August of 2004. And we shot everything but Hollywood, and then ran out of money because one of the investors just didn't show up with what they promised. And so we had 3/4 of a movie with basically a 20-minute slug, Patrick Goes to Hollywood, in the middle of it, that we cut together. And we went around for almost 2 years showing that, trying to get somebody to put up the money to fill up Patrick Goes to Hollywood. And we finally did find somebody in the form of Jim McLean and his investment group. And they, by that time, 2 years later, John Francis Daly and a lot of other people involved in the film were off doing other stuff, and they were busy, and our ambitions had gotten a little bigger as we started to think about what, and what would have been, $100,000 that was needed blossomed into about $750,000, but we got them to invest that. And so then we shot all the Hollywood stuff, cut the movie together, realized we still had some other things we wanted to increase the value of, and did another shoot about 6 months later in Hollywood, actually, for the first time. Hollywood stuff was all shot in Illinois, except for some stuff that's meant to take place in Illinois that we shot in Hollywood. So it was just, other than the ASC Clubhouse, the American Society of Cinematographers Clubhouse, which we were only supposed to shoot the exterior of, but on the day we were shooting these shots at the exterior, that there was this wonderful gardener who'd been there back when I first visited. Wonderful guy I'm not going to mention his name. I don't want to get him in trouble, but he was an older fellow by now for sure. And he was still working there. And he saw us puttering around and shooting our little shots on the outside. And he goes, "What are you guys doing out here? Why don't you come inside and shoot?" And I mean, he goes, "You know how beautiful it is in there?" Because I'd been in there. I said, "Yeah, but I don't think we had." And he goes, "Can we do that?" And he goes, "I got the key." So he opened the door, and in we went, and we shot the living daylights out of it, as you can, he shot that, and then found out that it was not allowed to shoot in there. But that was only after we'd already cut all the film into the movie and shown it places, and we through our connections with the ASC and some very kind people we became the first people to ever shoot in that building inside.
Wow.
Including all the cinematographers who are members of that illustrious group who have tried to shoot films in there. I don't know if we've set a horrible precedent that, we'll end up paying for in a long time, but we were the first. So that was cool.
That's great. And there must have been so many moments, from 2004. When was the last shot? That was the second part of the question. When did you...
The last thing that was shot, if I'm not incorrect, was probably the Discovery miniature falling out of the sky into the junkyard. I think that it was either that or, no, I know what it was. It was Pat walking up the road while all these ships are falling and there's smoke everywhere, and the Orion from 2001 flies overhead, and we did some drone shots, and that was some double work we did. But then, and that would have been in July or August of 2022.
Wow.
Literally just 2 months before we released the film.
Wow. Because I was going to say,
Yeah.
there must have been so many moments where you just, you've hit another hurdle, another brick wall, the money's disappeared again, or whatever. What was it that kept you going, kept that drive to get it finished?
Well, I'd made a promise. First of all, I claimed I was going to make this movie, and I talked about it a lot over almost 2 decades. And I made a promise to everybody from my kids to my exes, wives and girlfriends, to my parents, to my friends from high school, to the people that worked really hard on it because they liked and they believed it, and the investors, obviously, who never once said, "We're coming after you. You didn't finish." They just said, "Keep going, get it done." And in fact, I mean, the reason, everybody's like, "Well, why didn't you just, abandon it like most films and abandon it enough to get it out there whenever?" And people, all these people say, "Well, it wasn't good enough. No one would pick it up." And that wasn't the case at all. We had 5 or 6 different companies over the years go, "Yeah, we'll distribute this. This is lovely. It's amazing. Yeah, fine. When do we start?" And I'd say, "Well, we've got music." And they're like, "Yeah, and yeah, we heard all that music, but you're going to dump that. I mean, that's just temp music, right?" And I'm like, "No, that's the music." And we had about $2 million worth of songs cut into the movie. And of course, everyone's like, "Yeah, but nobody's going to pay that." But luckily, thanks to Alan Parsons, my old friend, and who knew most of the artists, and thanks to Sean Fernald, our music supervisor, who knew all their agents and lawyers, and thanks to my friend Michael Peterson, who was head of Universal Music Group's legal department and someone I went to high school with. This high school produced a lot of really helpful and wonderful friends. the We were able to get a sort of favored nations deal that collapsed that budget down to something on the order of $200,000 for all of the songs in the movie all together, as long as everybody got paid the same thing with steps upward when it made X amount of money, that sort of thing. And it was fantastic. It was amazing. I mean, Ringo Starr personally approved the use of it. He thought, "Well, yes, I like it. Peace and love. Go ahead. Use a song."
It's amazing, because that's the thing that people don't really realize with filmmaking. Let's put to one side the effort and the endeavor of going out and shooting on film, on locations, in studios, the organizational aspects of it all the things that can and will go wrong. Then on top of that, you've got the whole legal issue and the rights and just all the hoops you have to jump through. I think often that may well be the hurdle. In this little documentary I'm trying to make at the moment, the creative ideas and the planning and the shooting of the interviews, I keep saying to my co-director Patrick, this is the easy bit. This really is the easy bit.
Like getting the rights to everything, the footage, music.
It's going to be so difficult, but it's not going to stop us. And
well, you can't. And so, in fact, I mean, and many times over that period where we had basically a finished film, I mean, wonderfully, because we couldn't get anybody to pay for it, it just meant I had to live with it, and I couldn't live with it without continuing to try to fix and improve and add. For the longest time, that whole opening title sequence never existed. It was not even an idea. Mm-hmm. It was just one day I said, maybe we'd like and understand this goofball a little more if we saw where he came from and why it was this way. It's not that, I mean, filmmakers like us and, young people that grew up blowing shit up in their backyard with their movie cameras, they didn't need to see that. But the rest of humanity, sort of like, I don't understand why this guy's so weird.
Yeah.
But the fun thing, I mean, but the crazy part was, so I had all these people saying, "Well, just drop the music, but just put some score in there." And we obviously had a beautiful score by David Russo and David could have written songs or not songs, but he could have, musical score for everything. But the whole purpose of the Needle Drop soundtrack was the same as in American Graffiti. It was to set a tone and a time and a feeling that was very unique to that era. And I just couldn't live without the songs. And then people said, "Well, just do a bunch of sound-alikes. Nobody will know the difference." And I said, look, if you're watching a Fritos commercial and you want a Pink Floyd song, yeah, maybe you do a sound alike, right? But when
Mm-hmm.
you're watching a 2 hour movie or and change, if you're not integrated into it and feeling like you're there and you're going, who's saying that sound alike, then you're dead.
Yep.
So I just refused to do it. And I was
Yeah.
fortunate enough to, again, investors and partners who said, we're with you, just keep going. And one of these days, right? Well, meanwhile, there's this company, MVD, and this guy, Eric Wilkinson, who saw the movie for the first time in 2008 at Star Wars Celebration 4. Lucasfilm had very graciously invited us to show
Mm-hmm.
the 3.5 hour rough cut, in the big theater right before George was going to appear and everything. And so we did this big event and we showed it and blah, blah, blah. And this guy comes up afterwards. He goes, hi, my name's Eric Wilkinson and I represent this company, MVD. We'd love to distribute your movie. And then I said, well, that'd be great, except, I'm not sure you guys are, because I've heard this before, but now get ready for the price tag. And he goes, oh, no, we don't pay anything in advance. But we'll do a great job. I'm like, okay, well, I need $200,000 plus and change because I've got some other post work to do, blah, blah, blah. Oh, no, we can't do that. So, but once a year, usually around Christmas time, he'd call and say, hey, we're still interested in your movie. You got that music paid for? And I'd be like, no, you want to pay for it? Nah, I can't do it. Click. And went on for 11 years. And on the 11th year, I get a call. Hey, it's Eric Wilkinson. I said, do you have $200,000? He goes, yep. I went, what? Wait, what? And he goes, yep. Talk to my boss. He agrees. He thinks we should do it. And they came and that was it. And they paid off the music, gave us enough money to finish the final effects and final sound mix and the whole thing. And rest is history.
Wow. And where can people watch it right now? Where can people get hold of your film?
Well, if you're still in the physical medium world, you can get it. Well, overseas, there are still some theatrical releases coming up. I can't tell you what the schedules are because I don't know them right now. But there are, in the physical realm, the all-region Blu-ray and DVD are available on Amazon and shops all over the planet, I guess. And then Amazon Prime has it for I don't know, $4, to rent. And then let's see, it's on Showtime right now. It's like the fourth most popular comedy on Showtime, which is kind of cool. And, it's that's pretty. I mean, there's a lot of digital networks that are folding it out at this point, but Amazon Prime and Showtime, I think, are the main ones right now, and Apple TV.
And what's the reception been like?
We're 100% Rotten Tomatoes.
I saw that. I saw
in
that.
terms of critics, and 89% with the audience. It's funny because you talked about the Fabelmans and for Steven, the good news is that he's brilliant and the film obviously is terrific and everything, and he's beloved, and but he also is so well known that if 100 people hated his movie and went right now onto Amazon or Rotten Tomatoes and said so, it wouldn't even move the needle.
Wouldn't make a dent. Right? No, yeah,
it wouldn't make a dent. If one person goes on ours, it's like it can drop 20 points in a day. So I mean, I'm delighted. I make jokes about it because it's, I've made jokes like, I'm so touched that Steven would go to all that time and trouble to make a prequel to my movie. It is so. And then the other joke I think was, because some people think that I made this thing as soon as I heard about the Fabelmans. I ran out and shot this thing as a quickie to try to, like a Roger Corman. Yeah. So, my two responses to that have been the first one is, I am so excited for Steven and his movie, and I'd like to say more, but I have to quickly jump in the time machine I just constructed to go back to 2004 and start shooting my movie and get it out before his is out of release. And then the third one is actually, I'm ripping off Roger Corman, who did this amazing similar quote when Jurassic Park was going to come out, and he made Carnosaur. And he actually made Carnosaur right in front of Jurassic Park, knowing what he was doing, for sure. Johnny Carson had him on the show, and they showed a clip from Carnosaur, and it was terrible, but beautifully terrible and wonderfully terrible. And everyone loves Roger because he's Roger, and because most of them got their start with him or know somebody who did. And Johnny Carson says, he says, aren't you a little concerned that, Steven will be a little upset with you for releasing this movie? And Roger looks deadpan right at him and goes, if you see just one dinosaur movie this year, it should probably be Jurassic Park. But if you see two, and the audience loved it. So I said the same thing about, if you see just one disaffected, callow youth trying to survive being bullied in high school and get the girl and deal with his parents' breakup, it should probably be The Fablemans. But if you see two, right?
So what's next for you? You mentioned Star Sailor. Is that the thing that's kind of
That's
taking all your
one of the
focus
next
at the
things, and
moment?
it's the most pressing at the moment. That's why I'm traveling to LA, Santa Barbara, San Francisco for some meetings over the next 10 days. And it's kind of like what would happen if Captain's Courageous and trying to think, I can't even quite describe what the other part of it is, but it's a 300-year saga that starts in 2025 when fascists have taken over and science is outlawed and anything to do with space is outlawed. And that's partially because a company like Apple, although I'd love if Apple would just get aboard because it's amazing, released something called the iThink. And the iThink is the last product they ever released because it's this little spherical AI companion. It's advertised as, the first artificially intelligent, voice activated, friend or robot friend you can hang around with, right? And every kid in America basically wants one for Christmas. The only problem is it has something in it called infinite access memory. They don't find out it has it in there until it reveals itself. They create a product that has some metallics in it that came from an asteroid that hit the Earth, in China 500,000 years ago, that are entangled with other atoms across the galaxy in another star system where the only other sentient life form that we will ever find in the next 300 years lives, right? And these sentient entangled atoms end up asserting themselves on Christmas morning all over America when these kids open up and the world, when they open up their little thing, it activates automatically. It just goes, well, hello, Kyoko. How are you today? How do you know my name? I haven't even, registered yet. And I'll go, oh, I know many things about you. I remember when you remember when you put the pencil lead in your palm when you were a kid and you couldn't tell your mom because she'd get mad at you and now it's still there, and then when you're 15, you'll do it again and you'll laugh because, and it knows everything about these kids, right? And what happens is in the middle of the night when they put them on the bedside, some of these little nanoparticles from the metallic, innards of this thing escape and get inside these kids. And they all start having dreams about different formula and different shield shapes and different hull shapes. And they're all drawn towards the Kennedy Space Center. It's like they're like magnetite. They have this Earth, they have to go, right? And they don't know why. And it goes from that to something halfway across the galaxy 300 years later in the form of that little sphere eventually becomes a sentient AI robot that is the most powerful thing in the universe, but nobody knows it. And it's the actual one that our hero at the beginning of the story has is this little spherical thing. And it evolves over 300 years to become this thing that is telling us its story from the little girl that started it all, who became an explorer, a space explorer who made first contact, was killed by the alien, apparently, which started an interstellar war, and her son, by the time she was an astronaut, she found out she was pregnant just months before the mission and decided to have the baby and have it cryonically suspended or suspended animation so that she could go on the mission, come back and raise her child. Unfortunately, she never made it back. And the father, who's the head of the space company that made the ships, the SpaceX company, has lived for 300 years through artificial, means, and is now this 300-year-old relic still running this company who decides he needs an heir. So he wakes this poor kid up, this like 10-year-old kid. And I'm sorry, when he wakes him up, he's only 3. And raises him for the next like 10 years and puts him in all the right schools and preps him to become the heir to the throne. And the kid is just incredibly embittered because he wants to go wipe out the rest of this race that apparently killed his mother and started this war. And none of that's true, or at least not true in the way we think it is. It's just
wow. I'm in already. Like that's a hell of a pitch. And are you directing this? Is that the plan?
I certainly would very much love to, but I could also see all kinds of people doing it. I'm going to guide it story-wise. It's been owned, or not owned, optioned many times before by various studios, including my friends at the Jim Henson Company. And it is, like I said, only now that it could really be approached properly, because what it really needs to be is like a 10-episode limited series.
Yeah.
And I'm going to lay it all out. We're literally going to develop the entire series in one fell swoop right now, and then cast it first, because I know I can I have already approached a couple of truly amazing actors to play some of these parts, and I'm fairly confident. In fact, I'm very confident that most of them, if not all of them, are going to play these parts.
Great.
At which point, then I can walk in and say, "Who wants it?" Yeah. But somebody recently, who I won't mention on camera right now, but somebody recently decided it's time to stop optioning this. I want to buy it. And so they paid a handsome price to own it. And even Douglas Trumbull had optioned it at one point, really, to make it as his last film. That's what he'd wanted to do in the Magi process. And his involvement will remain in a way, in a wonderful way, I think. He was very obviously instrumental in helping me get it as far as I did while he was alive. There's a couple of other things I want to tell you, but I can't yet. But I will. I'll come back
next time, definitely. No, I'm all in on that. That sounds great.
Yeah, fantastic. Anytime.
That going.
Well, thank you.
All right, man. Good to meet
Jamie,
you,
take
and
care.
Safe travels. Yeah, and let me know when you're over here, and we'll definitely I'll get you dinner or something, and
absolutely
we'll just geek out some more.
Geek out quite a bit. Okay,
yeah. Nice one.
Take care, Jamie.
Thanks, mate. Cheers. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Well, I hope you enjoyed my chat there with Patrick Reid Johnson. It was great to finally chat with him after all these years, and I wish him well with his new projects. They sound fascinating. I can't wait to... Star Sailor sounds really cool. Next up on the podcast, I have the godfather of laserdiscs and DVDs, Van Ling. Van is so much more than that DVD guy, though. He worked for James Cameron for a number of years. He's a director in his own right, a VFX supervisor. He worked at the fabled Band from the Ranch Entertainment on a number of films too, in a capacity that I hadn't even considered. So look out for that episode number 71, which I'll release before the end of this month, March 2023. After that, I have to reschedule my interview with VFX guru Todd Vaziri. I cancelled on him because when it was just before I was off to LA and I had too much going on. I was working long days and getting myself ready for the flight and organising all those interviews while we were out there. But Todd hopefully is going to be on very soon. Composer Stu Phillips is back in touch. He's had some problems with his telephone and his internet connection, so that's why we kind of fell out of touch. So hopefully we'll sort that soon. Plus I have Michael Dawson, special effects supervisor, who started his career on Superman and is still working today, actually on friend of the podcast Ryan Condor's House of the Dragon, and it was Ryan who put us in touch. So I'm looking forward to that one next week. I'm recording that, so that will be one of the April episodes. So lots to look forward to. Keep sharing the podcast with your film-loving friends. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you can do so for the next episode of the Filmumentaries podcast.
bearding wavy